consistent strategy that many of us encountered whenever our faith comes up are what could be called questions of skepticism concerning aspects of our faith. Now, some of these are meant to deflect, while some may actually be sincere inquiries. Nonetheless, they are questions that we need to understand and respond to in some way. Over the next few weeks, I want to look at some that have recently come to me. I hope that by looking at these questions, we will reveal some of the reasons why truth matters. Today, truth is denied, ignored, and resisted with open hostility. Yet in life and in times of crisis, we discover that truth matters. Not long ago, a young man came to me with some questions that a skeptical acquaintance of his presented to him. He wanted some help in responding to those questions. Now, my schedule prevented me from providing a timely response to him, but as I began writing some of the responses, I realized that the skeptic's questions actually were important enough that I wanted to look at them in this venue. Now, the first question was actually two separate questions or related questions. He asked, why doesn't God take Satan out, and why is the flood okay? Now, as I said, these two questions are related. You see, both of them deal with the topic of justice. Now, today I want to look at the second part of that question first, and then next week I'll look at the second part. Next week I think you'll understand why I chose to look at them in the reverse order. Now, as to the flood, what the skeptic is referring to is, of course, the worldwide flood spoken of in Genesis 6 through 8. Actually, I dealt with the why of the flood occurring in a previous Truth Matters episode. I've included the link to that episode in the description below, so look at it. But before we look specifically at the flood today, I want to examine the overall question of justice. You see, justice is easily one of the realities that seem to appear throughout the world and history. I mean, the why question in this episode itself presents a dilemma of justification. What do I mean by that? When something perhaps unexpectedly happens, we want to know why it happened. This is especially true in catastrophic events. We want to know why something occurred even more than how it happened. Let's look at it for instance, in terms of several examples. Let's begin with a natural disaster. I live in an area that has tornadoes. At certain times of the year, the seasons are changing and air currents collide, and they do so in such a way that powerful storms erupt. Sometimes these storms create a situation where tornadoes form. Now, we understand how that happens. But when a tornado strikes a certain place and follows a path, and it destroys some things and leaves other places untouched, the why question seems to creep in. We somehow want to know if there's a reason beyond the randomness. Why is that? Now, while we might settle for randomness from a natural disaster, we're not as easily content to accept such an answer when it comes to human or sentient behavior. What do I mean by this is that when a conscious person does something, we want to know why they did it. What is the justification for taking a certain action? For instance, if a child picks up an object and willfully takes that object and strikes another child in order to harm them, we don't just look at that situation and sort of shrug our shoulders. That's especially true if it was your child that was struck. Something inside of us wants to forcefully ask, why did you do that? Now, why do we ask that question? Well, it's because there's something inside of us that says that the action doesn't seem justified. I mean, a seemingly innocent person has been harmed, and we want to know why that action was taken. I mean, why did the first child think or feel that it was okay to do that? Now, this example puts several things into play. First of all, is the implied moral violation that harming an innocent person is wrong. There's no justification for it. This is what I mean when I say that we have an innate sense of justice. When we hear or see something wrong happening, we innately want to know what might be the justification for it. I mean, Why did it happen? Also notice that the root connection between the two words justice and justification. Justice is the idea that something wrong has been righted. A criminal commits a crime. They are arrested, tried, and punished accordingly. Justice is served. Justification is the idea that an action has a right reason for it occurring. An armed man attacks an innocent individual. That individual defends themselves and in the process harms or kills the assailant. We say that that action is justified. You see, in either situation, a perceived wrong is reckoned as right. Now, that is a long explanation for what we seem to naturally sense. The problem arises when we can't come up with or understand what the right reason is. In other words, when something happens and we don't understand the justification for it, we therefore ask the why question. And this brings us to our question of the day. Why was the flood justified? Now, the flood account in Genesis was not merely describing a random natural event. It was a willful act by God. Genesis 6:7 says, "Then the Lord said, I will wipe out mankind whom I have created from the face of the land, mankind and animals as well, and crawling things and the birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them." Now, there is nothing accidental in the statement that God makes in this verse. There is no, oops, sorry, in those words. It was an intentional act, and that's exactly the source of the why question. Why did God come to the decision that he had to act in this manner? I mean, what was his justification? Well, fortunately, he tells us. In Genesis 6:5, he says, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the face of the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually." Let's break these words down. First of all, it says that he saw. In other words, God was aware of the moral violations that were being committed. If you and I were to see a moral violation and did nothing, what would that say about us? Secondly, it says that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth. The moral violations were not incidental or limited. It was worldwide, and it was great both in terms of the amount and the intensity. We could easily say it was out of control. Lastly, it says that every intent of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. The moral evil was deep, intentional, and continuous. God judged the situation as unredeemable. It was like looking at a house that had rotted to such an extent that there's no way to fix it. The only solution was to bring the house down. The situation was not merely an occasional or limited moral breakdown. The situation was one of continuous, deep-rooted, and widespread depravity. Genesis 6:11 says, "Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence." Did you hear that? Filled with violence. Genesis 6:13 adds this by saying, "Then God said to Noah, the end of humanity has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of people. Behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth." This is rampant violence and wickedness requiring a radical action on the part of God. Up to the present, there has no other comparable action by God to the behavior of mankind. I mean, we have seen terrible times in mankind's history, and yet nothing has yet risen to the level to such an intervention by God. God determined that his action was justified. And this partially answers the question of this episode as to why God did what he did. But there's another aspect of the why that's of this question remaining. Did God have the moral authority to make such a judgment? You see, we each exercise a degree of personal justice. If someone says something wrong about us, or if someone does something wrong to us, we can take it upon ourselves to respond and try to make things right. For instance, this is how fistfights begin. Or, in a more subtle manner, emotional revenge is acted out as a way to achieve personal justice. We feel that we have the right. We believe that we are justified. But if someone slanders you, You can't take it upon yourself to assault or murder them, can you? No, you can't. You don't have the moral authority. I mean, if your neighbor throws trash in your yard, you don't have the moral or civil authority to burn down their house for doing it. There are laws and civil rulings that govern and decide who has the authority to bring justice to such situation. Okay then, back to the question. Did God have the moral authority to exercise the judgment demonstrated in the flood? This, of course, begs the question of who God is. He is God. He is the Creator. If He is God, then He has the sovereign authority over all of creation. He, more than anyone else, has the moral authority over His creation. But we need to understand something. His actions are always in keeping with His moral character. 1 John 1:5 says, "This is the message that we have heard from Him and announced to you, that God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all." It is an error to attribute to God any moral wrongness. He has revealed Himself in just such a way. Deuteronomy 32:3-4 says, "For I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, for all His ways are just. God, a God of faithfulness and without injustice. Righteous and just is He." It couldn't be more clear than that. I mean, I could quote a string of verses stating about the holiness of God. You see, He is the moral apex of everything. He determined upon His moral authority that His creation stood in extreme violation of its purpose. He acted, and His actions were justified by His moral character. He did what was right. Another way to say and answer the original question would be to say, if it was bad enough that God had to step in, then it must have been just as bad or worse than is described. From what was described in Genesis, if God hadn't stepped in, there's no reason to believe that we would even be here today. Now, having said all that, there's only a couple of options that are available for us. And this gets at the root of the question and the questioner. Each of us can either choose to accept or reject God's moral authority. Each option carries a respondent consequence. Now let's look at each of these options. Now, first let me say this. God's reality is not changed by any decision of an individual or humanity as a whole. In other words, God doesn't exist or cease to exist based on any decision or opinion within His creation. He's not there because I want Him to be there. And likewise, He's not non-existent because anyone ignores or disbelieves in His existence. We have absolutely no authority over God. And sooner or later, everyone will know that He is and who He is. Now, if a person accepts God's moral authority in their life, they do so as a declaration of faith. Hebrews 11:6 says that without faith it is impossible to please Him. For the one who comes to God must believe that He exists and that He proves to be one who rewards those who seek Him. Listen, I believe Him. I believe not only that He exists, but that by believing in Him puts me right on the right side of a God who knows that I've offended Him. I honestly acknowledge that I have violated His purpose in my life. I admit it. But I also know and believe that this righteous God has provided a just way to deal with my guilt. He came and paid the price to make me right with Him. And so, I believe Him. I'm staking eternity on it. Now, if a person rejects God's authority, moral authority, it doesn't change God in any way. He's still there. And since He's there, He has the moral authority to judge even that rejection. Just saying that He's not there when He is a lie. But it's more than that. All of us are moral violators under His jurisdiction. Neither He nor us can claim our innocence. It's not true. We are all guilty. And there are consequences to that guilt. Hebrews 10:31 says, "It is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God." This is more than just a philosophical discussion. Each and every one will face the reality of the living God. Now, a person may say, "Well, I just don't believe in God, so You haven't answered the question. Well, if there is no God, there is no question. The question on its face assumed God. If there is no God, the question falls into irrelevance. But if there is no God, then what flood are you talking about? I mean, blind nature is morally silent to any question of why. There's no reason to ask the why question in blind, accidental nature. But if there is a God, as the question assumed, he was morally justified in punishing a violent and corrupt world for their attitudes and actions. Ignorance or denial is a long fight with a short stick against the living God, who has revealed himself as both righteous and merciful. It's a dangerous and eternal gamble to boast a proud fist against God. A better approach is to honestly admit the truth about ourselves and about God. There's no danger in asking the question. The danger lies in refusing the answer. Isaiah 55:6 says, "Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near." Denial is a dangerous option. Why? Because truth matters. Thanks for watching and listening to Truth Matters. Please like, share, and subscribe to Truth Matters. It truly helps to spread and keep us going. We'll catch you next time.